Hello, everyone, and welcome to the VIA Pioneer Speaker Series. My name is Ryan Nemec, and I'm the Education Director of the VIA Institute on Character. And I'm very pleased to have our first ever tandem of speakers for our speaker series here. And before I introduce John Yeager and Sherri Fisher, I always just remind people a little bit about what this series is all about. So this series, the VIA Pioneer Speaker Series, was created at the end of 2012 with, actually, I'm sorry, 2011, end of 2011, with the thinking of trying to help practitioners around the world learn more about the latest practices with character strengths. And since this field of positive psychology and character strengths is still quite new, therefore we need people who are on the forefront, people who are what we can call pioneers in bringing forth the layest research and practice in helping people to tap into what's best in them. And I'm so pleased that John Yeager and Sherri Fisher were interested in presenting here in this series, because they are both truly pioneers in this area of character strengths, particularly in the domain of education, in working with schools and children, adolescents, teachers, and parents. And so actually, I'm just gonna to save time here, I'm gonna move right into an introduction of John Yeager, just to let everybody know first the logistics for today. So I will introduce each speaker immediately before they speak. Each speaker will speak for about 30 minutes, and if you have any questions for John or Sherri, or just for the two of them, please feel free to email me, ryan@viacharacter.org. That's ryan@viacharacter.org. Email me at any point, and I'll likely save the questions for the end for John and Sherri. Okay? And okay, so John Yeager is a nationally recognized consultant on strengths in schools, and he's the director of the Center for Character Excellence at the Culver Academies in Indiana. And he's launched a model program that integrates character strengths among the entire school community. He's a former assistant professor at Boston University School of Education, and he's a senior scholar at Boston University's Center for Character and Social Responsibility. And he has over 37 years of experience as an educator, a coach, a professional athlete, which I didn't know about, I'd like to learn more about, and author. And he's the co-author, along with Sherri Fisher, of Smart Strengths. And without further ado, let me turn it over to you, John. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I appreciate you and Neil Mayerson et al. At the VIA Institute for this opportunity to have Sherri and I part of this process today. My talk's going to be about what we call 7 best practices of smart schools, applications of character, resilience, and relationships. But first of all, I want to throw a quick quote out to you. And some of you have heard this if you watched the movie Coach Carter, or you heard Nelson Mandela in the past. But the real author of this quote, our deepest fear, is Marianne Williamson. And she says our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. And she says it's not our darkness that most frightens us. It's our lightness. And this is a perfect segue to understanding more about the meaningfulness of looking at character strengths. I'm a practitioner, and for me, the work in strengths really has crystallized in the last 7 or 8 years. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. And what I wanted to chat with today about best practices and how this meaningfulness comes alive. And time-wise, I'm going to concentrate on the 3 bolded best practices that I feel are very important for the implementation and application of those strengths in our schools today. The first is to get top-level buy-in, whether it's the head of school, if it's an independent school, or the superintendent and principals in a public school, whether it's urban or rural, whether it is a highly endowed independent school or a highly underserved school system that doesn't have a lot of money. The second piece is to really measure results, and measure those results qualitatively and quantitatively. Now, right now, I'd say more of my work is looking at the qualitative piece and really need to get more into the quantitative piece to actually show some people the money. The third piece is testing the waters, with a dream team. Getting a dream team from a school district or a specific school who already have a certain level of buy-in once the higher administration bought in, and to actually have them take part in a first round course in this area, which I'll talk about in a little while. The fourth area is, once you test the waters, is to rapidly build momentum, one educator at a time. And as you do that, the potential is that it can become more viral, and that allows it in many ways to be delivered down to the students. In many cases, said before, and I know Matt White has mentioned this also, that once you're exposed to understanding more about character strengths in your first year, it takes some while to actually internalize that before you can actually bring it out in a classroom curriculum. The fifth area is to apply SMART strengths towards your institutional challenges, i.e. looking at the strategic planning of the school and the mission of the school. And as you rapidly build momentum, you want to develop internal expertise. So actually, to take yourself out of a job there by developing a site team that can be sustainable, okay, and also have succession planning in there over time where other people will be trained into there. And also the importance of reaching beyond your school or system to go externally and to support other venues within the community to make it more of a community-wide piece, partnerships in a way. If you could go to the next slide, Ryan. Several years ago, Sherri and Dave and I met. We actually met in the first MAP program at the University of Pennsylvania in 2005 and 2006. We were in the same cohort group together, and I invited them out in the summer of 2006 to come out to Culver to do our first kind of strengths training with teachers out there. And from that moment, in the next couple of years, we started taking a lot of notes. We audio and videotaped our sessions. And eventually, over the next 5-year process, we developed the book called Smart Strengths. I'd say it's a labor of love. It was a lot chewing tinfoil at times, trying to make sure we integrated things in such a right way. But we looked at the book at focusing on 3 major stakeholders, okay? The adult mentors being teachers, parents, and coaches that form a triangular relationship in how they can work together so that their messages are more consistently clear with young people. For teachers, we wanted them to see that you can magnify student strengths to increase achievement and satisfaction, to help decrease classroom management issues, and to hopefully improve relationships and motivation. For parents, helping their child to develop habits and healthy habits and choices, to build high-quality connections and relationships, i.e. the work that Jane Dutton's done at the University of Michigan's Ross School for Entrepreneurism, where she's talked about high-quality connections being 3 major things. One is respectful engagement, the second is task enabling, and the third is having trust and how that can be built at home. And the third piece is bringing out the best in our coaches and our actually athletic coaches. Okay, so they can best serve young people. There's over 40 million young people in the United States today that play youth sports at some level, K to 12, or even younger. And we have 4 million coaches there. And a lot of times in the sports venue, it used to be more about sportsmanship programs, be nice to each other, shake hands at the end of the game. But the strengths piece, as you know, and I'm preaching to the choir here, it goes much beyond that. It's basically taking a deeper dive for coaches to begin to understand what their strengths are, how they play those out in their lives, and how can they best, understand and advocate and support the strengths of the young people that they serve so that they can not only perform better, but they can enjoy the process and be more satisfied with that. And so as we go to the next slide, there are 5 different schools I want to talk with you about today that we've done some work with. The first, of course, is the Culver Academies, where I'm located. This is my 13th year. I'm a transplant from Boston. Culver Academies is a 800-student rigorous independent boarding school on the shores of a beautiful lake around 2 hours and 15 minutes southeast of Chicago. And it's a wonderful setting where we've had top-level buy-in to do work with. We have a fairly well-endowed program and where money really isn't the object, and that's been really exciting about that. But as we did more work with the academies and developed the Smart Strengths model here, we also began to look at several other schools. Around a half an hour from here, the Triton School Corporation is a rural, a very rural community that has over 60% of their students with reduced and free lunch. So there's that poverty factor that going in there, and we tried to replicate some of our practices over there, which I'll talk about. The third is Crystal House Academy, and Crystal House Academy is located in several different places throughout the globe. The first area is in, it's a charter school in Indianapolis urban area, and also there's other academies through the Crystal House network, and we've actually sent kids to our Crystal House Academy for a mission trip that's located in South Africa, and this coming March we'll have a mission trip of students going to Crystal House, India. And so doing strengths work outside of this, the U.S. with underserved communities. The fourth is the Plymouth or the Widener New Tech High School, which is based on the New Tech Collaboration Schools of Inquiry model, and that's located also in northern Indiana. And the fifth area we'll talk a little bit about are the Charleston, South Carolina schools. Through some collaboration with the psychology department at the Citadel, which is the Military College of South Carolina, we're doing some work with their schools now. So I'll talk about three of those best practices and how they weave themselves into these areas. And as we go to the next slide, this idea of looking at the SMART model. So if you go to Alaska, there's probably 100 different words that can help to define snow. Okay, if you go to Hawaii, there's one, snow. Many times when people look at strengths, they just look at strengths, our strengths, our strengths. So what we began to look at is a way and an easy acronym of understanding a variety of different applications of looking at strengths. And we came up with the SMART model, which is confused a lot of times with the SMART goal-setting model. But we looked at that first area of being spotting, which is a term that's viral in the lexicon of strengths work today. But when you know your own strengths, of course, you're better observers of strengths in others and more attentive to spotting what's good instead of trying to find fault. We also have looked at, if the obverse is correct too. If you're having a bad hair day and you're not treating people well, if you're kind of a schadenfreude or finding faults and finding pleasure in the pain of others, chances are you're not going to be spotting good things in other people too. The second area is managing. How do you take your signature strengths? How do you take your first top 5 strengths, or what Sherri Fisher calls your strengths 6 through 10, which are your best supporting strengths, and how do you mold those together? How do you look at those in concert with each other? It's a great example when you get students ready to write their common applications for college, and part of the common applications, of course, asks you for kind of a SWOT analysis, but many times, what are your strengths? This is a wonderful way, if you've already got a set of seeing how your top strengths are managed in your day-to-day life. And we'll focus mostly on the spotting and managing today, but I just wanted to let you know the ART, which is advocating, learning to advocate your strengths, or what are the strengths that help build the bridge in what you do? Where do your strengths come out most? Are they on the athletic field, in the classroom, and other types of relationships, at home, for teachers, or for young people, or for parents? So the advocating, which brings up, what Chris Peterson once said about what he called tonic and phasic strengths, where tonic strengths tend to happen all the time, okay? And phasic strengths are things that happen once in a while, like, let's say, bravery, because not all situations, conceptually need to have bravery happening at that time. So getting people to look at their strengths that may come out differently in certain environments. And then also relating strengths. How do we best appeal to ourselves and appeal to other people? I know Sherri will talk in a little while about this concept of strength buttons. But the thing is to know is that how can we best know what our strengths are and relate to the strengths of other people? And we feel once you have the SMAR down, then you begin to become a trainer of other people and help to make this viral and to bring it and make it come alive. One of the things that I wanted to mention too up at that level of spotting is, of course, there's a dark side, Luke, to every strength, that there's a shadow side. And it's really important to understand that shadow side, some people actually might call a weakness at times, and it's a misuse of that strength, many times too much of a strength. You know, so getting young people to understand that, and I've found in the schools when teachers know more about this and their students know more about this, I've said situations where teachers have said where some adolescents or their humor and playfulness is getting a little out of hand, they just look at the student, they point to the student and said, hey, you're going shadow on me. And that's about it. It's dispassionate. There's no shame going on. The teacher doesn't get angry. It's a win-win type of a situation. And as we go on to the next slide, as we begin to see that there's maybe a variety of different understandings and names for different levels and ways of strengths, one of the things that I'm finding that's very, very interesting now, that how the tonic and phasic strengths come alive, we're having students look at this idea of intuitive strengths without even before you know what your top 5 strengths are. Or maybe if you did, but you weren't even sure all the time. What are those intuitive strengths that come to your mind that might not be on your top list of 5? And they might be. And getting young people to see this, you know, I know it when I see it. It did, you know, it scored 13 on me on the VIA. But with the multidimensionality, this is really an important piece for me. And the second thing is that you take the intuitive strengths and you match those up with what the VIA strengths are. And from that, you get into the me at my best category, or me at my best activity. And many of the activities that we use have already been validated in different ways. But, you know, telling that story to somebody else, telling your story and getting a partner to understand what your strengths are and letting you know that gives you more information. And then the 360 gallery, where you actually get a variety of students in the classroom, a variety of teachers to actually guesstimate your strengths, write it down, and tell strength stories about you. And so what we like to do now is to take these 4 check-marked areas and then having the student find a teacher or a coach or a parent to have a mentor discussion about all these strengths and to see how they come alive across the board. And the teachers can do this with fellow teachers. So the multidimensionality is very important in how these come out in different environments. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. Thanks. So the first area where we had top level down buy-in was at the Culver Academies. And we started off back, and I brought Sherri and Dave into Culver because, and they've been each there around 6 or 7 times helping work with our faculty and staff throughout the last 6 years or so. And we had a group of 22 teachers who volunteered. We gave them a little stipend for our first round. Some people that thought they were going to Kumbaya or Happyology, and they knew they were going to get some dollars for it for professional development. And it was our job to prove them that there was a lot more to it. And I think what happened with our Smart Strengths 1 training, point 1 training, it allowed them to understand a little bit more of a different vision of how they can see students today. And so we began to look a lot with their strengths and having teachers really identify their own strengths. And as Jane Gillam has once said, getting them to do strengths work in their own lives. And since then, we've had what we call level 2 and level 3 training, where Sherri has done a lot of the level 2 training out at Culver with us, you know, to get people to the next level. And the level 3 training are basically the people that are of the site team. A core group of probably 8 people that really help to deliver the strengths message here at Culver that I hope helped to oversee. And I think that was really important, that we rapidly gained momentum in just making it internalized there too. We also have our students, when they come in as freshmen, take the VIA youth, and we have them do this through their humanities classes. And we have a lot of applications for this use in literature and history, especially, and Mark Lincoln's has talked about this before, with the tension of weakness of strength of will with the classic epic, the Odyssey, and a variety of other different areas where we're getting young people to a point in their lives at 9th grade at ages 14 or 15 where they're still sometimes subjects of their own world, but in many ways what they need to do is to, as they see themselves in the world, beginning to see what others are like. We're using it in our Physics First program, in group work. We're using it all across the board with different aspects of our advanced placement language and culture class. Natural home is humanities for this. And then also we've developed what we call the parent the PSI, the Parent Strengths Initiative, where we have parents try to line their strengths up to see how they communicate with teachers and with their children. We're mostly a boarding school, so a lot of the conversation happens either on Skype or online. And getting to come from a strengths perspective when a student has something challenging going on is important. And finally, this idea of working with our alumni, bringing in our alumni to talk about how their character strengths have helped them, and it's a great modeling piece that we have there. Another thing at Culver is we have what's called the Culver Leadership Academy, and the Culver Leadership Academy really works with our hourly employees, and we actually do via strength training with them. So we get a clear and consistent message with all the adults here. As you go to the next slide, one of the interesting activities that we do with our faculty and with our students is called the strengths mapping, and some of you may be already familiar with it. If you look at the outstanding ends, the corners of heart, mind, self, and others, looking at Chris Peterson's circumplex, we'll see that Joan in the Venn diagram of the Olympic rings, you know, she's bringing a lot of stuff in there and connecting the dots. And we find that these graphic aspects of showing relationships between strengths is really important. On the next slide, another thing that we're doing as we bring this to come alive, what we're taking is the VIA character strengths, and we started color coding the different categories and to different colors there and to classification for the students to have more of a visual and the teachers to have more of a visual. For example, as you go to the next slide, each of our students gets a strengths card. I've initialized just the names to protect the innocent, but Carter, if you look there, he has 3 strengths in the transcendent area. Just a wonderfully great kid, has forgiveness and mercy as a top strength. And JW, if you see hers, and NS, if you see hers, you know, you can see where we've color-coded it. We've put the cowardly lion in for courage and a lot of different areas there of looking at their signature strengths. It's really interesting. When I see 3 or more yellow areas in sophomore boys, I know that the shadow side's going on in the courage category for some of these boys. Okay, they tend to be too cool for school, little testosterone macho stuff, and it's just I don't tell them this, but it's just an interesting thing where they need to be aware of how that can go to the shadow side. So the color code actually giving us some really interesting informal data as we see our students here. Another thing on the next slide is that we offer scholarships to 4 different scholarships to a group of worthy students throughout the year. And the students come in and they do their interviewing, the finalists. These are 4 full-year scholarships. But I also do a strengths training with them. On the slide on the right, I bring them to our computer lab, and they take the VIA right then and there. We don't let them do that at home because their parents would be there and they'd try to play it as if it was the test. Then afterwards, we bring them through a new games activity, and then we have them do strengths mapping with each other. Okay, and this is a group that did strengths matching, and not I think one of these students was given the scholarship, but the other 3 were given merit money that they didn't make it. They didn't make the final 4 of the 15 in the room, but we're finding that 85% of the students that go through this scholarship process that are finalists actually come over because the experience. By the end of the day, these kids were friends with each other. Instead of competition, you know, where their parents were freaking out because this is a big ticket item, sending your kids for 4 years here. But we found that these kids got to know each other through knowing their strengths. Really exciting stuff. From there, we actually went on to the Triton schools, which I'll talk about briefly on the next slide. Triton schools, Jeremy Ripple, who's on the right with the striped shirt there, they do a lot of work where their superintendent, I did some appreciative inquiry work with their leadership team and their school board, and then found to have a good relationship with Jeremy, the elementary school principal, where we do a lot of 360 strengths gallery work with his 5th and 6th graders. He actually goes into the computer lab in the school's library and actually reads every single VIA question out and has the kids take the VIA online, you know, as he reads one out to make sure everybody has it there. But because of the top-down went to Jeremy, but the principal at the junior senior high school, he didn't buy into this stuff at first. But as we did more work with this at the at the elementary school, those students moved up to the junior, senior high school, 7th and 8th grade, and he began to understand, and he got it. This is a great way with the 360 Strengths Gallery activity, how we see our own strengths and how do others see our strengths too. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things that when we're working with underserved populations, the work that Ruby Payne out of Houston has done in her book, A Framework for Understanding Poverty, she says four reasons people leave poverty. And one is that it's a special talent or skill. And we're finding out that playing to their strengths can really help and support them in all the things that they do. So as we go to the next slide, in the Crystal House Academy, which is founded by Crystal DeHaan, who is a philanthropist in the Indianapolis area and has these other schools, well, we work down with their teachers down in Indianapolis, but then we send out our group of schools here, and this is with on the bookends are two of our students who actually did strengths work. They didn't have computers there at the school, but they did they did a guesstimate of their 24 strengths and did a variety of activities with the students there, and they're really, really exciting to take this to the next level next year. One of the girls who ran that program for us, our seniors, a couple of years ago, and I'll quote her. She says, "The biggest success in our week of workshops was seeing the quietest members of the group learn to own their strengths and make them part of their identities. We did a 360 in which members of the group assessed each other's strengths and wrote them down. It was amazing to see members of the group unanimously decide and reassure quieter or more reserved classmates that were kind, courageous, and intelligent." And we hope to do the same thing in India this coming year. And as the next slide, as we look at from top-down levels, but also to gain momentum at the Plymouth Widener New Tech High School. And the New Tech Network, NTN, has approximately 100 schools in the United States, and this is focused on this idea of project-based learning. It's about inquiry that builds critical thinking and communication skills. So it's all about group work. So this was a natural home, and I had an opportunity to train their new faculty up there. Plymouth has around 1,000 students, but only 150 of them are now in the new tech version, and I think that's going to grow over time. And some of the qualitative results out of this that the students, they want to take the survey again to see how it changes, and we know through the work that Chris Peterson and Suk Park has done that they don't change as rapidly as that, but they're excited about that. They've created what we call a group called Ignite Talk that talks about their aha moments in their School of Inquiry, and their presentations bring in the VIA each time. They're talking a lot about shadow strengths and how it comes alive for them. So one of the teachers had mentioned the students regularly come to her to use the knowledge of their strengths to help create teams for projects. So we think that's very valuable. I'll be speaking at the New Tech National Conference in New Orleans in July, and hopefully we'll get more New Tech schools involved with that as we see that. But it's been really exciting. But the first part of the work had to be done to do all these activities, to do 360 strengths galleries, to do a variety of different activities actually with the faculty first, to get them to feel comfortable in their own strengths skin. From that, we've also done work with, on the next slide, with the Charleston County Schools in Charleston, South Carolina. It was kind of a surreptitious route. I remember actually meeting at the IPA conference in Philly several years ago. The Conway Saylor, who's a psychology professor at the Citadel, which is the military college of South Carolina. I had an opportunity last year to go down there and to meet with her psychology majors and her service learning class. And these majors and the service learning students actually go out and do field work with the Charleston County schools. And if you see the picture right here, we have several different, I think they were all seniors last year, and they're doing a 360 analysis. And I keep on talking about this. Basically, everybody writes down what they guesstimate to be the top 5 strengths of another student, okay, or another cadet in this case, and they write it down on a piece of paper. Then, if you look behind the woman's right shoulder, the cadet's right shoulder, they actually write the strengths down for that person. And from that perspective, then if they have frequency, somebody else chose it, they put a check mark there. And then we go all around the room and people tell stories. And this stuff is amazing when we've done this with people before. I remember doing this with a group of people at actually at our health center, we had our nursing staff, and one person started crying. And I said, well, what did I do? Well, she had said afterwards, nobody ever said this to me in my life before. Very, very telling. And now we do. We've changed business over there, so it's a little bit better that way. From that standpoint of actually training some of our students there, they actually have gone into work, do field work with the Charleston schools. So if you go to the next slide, Piers Weller, who is the picture on that first slide right there on under managing, he'll be graduating this year, but he was kind of one of the lead students. He's a little bit older, actually had been in the Navy before he went to the Citadel, and he talks a lot with the students and his fellow cadets about managing strengths. How do you take your strengths and kind of match those all up together? And they've done a lot of work with the students in the North Charleston High School, which is considered, unfortunately, to be a failing school, and trying to get these kids to understand how their strengths can help them with the challenges that they have in their lives, but also at Jenkins Academy, which is alternative school. One of the things that Dr. Saylor has worked with them, too, is she's developed what we call a Flourish and Fitness Scale, which is based on Marty Seligman's PERMA model. And then we're starting to look at how can that connect the dots with more about strengths. Several of the different schools in Charleston are involved with PBIS, which is Positive Behavioral Intervention Supports, which are basically help schools get capacity building so they can effectively help students to adapt and sustain themselves, in having a more positive discipline than in the past. And we're seeing that I'm talking with people there and hoping that we're going to do more work with Smart Strengths with the Charleston schools. And actually the next step is to go in and to train the teachers. In this case, it's coming externally and bottom up, even though we have support from the top end. And we just need to find the right circumstances to get in there. But we're finding through the New Tech Network, through the Widener Plymouth School of Inquiry, and the PBIS, is that strengths work is a natural supplement to this. It's not an add-on, and in some cases, maybe it's the missing link, which is really, really exciting there. So if we, you look back to see, the best practices there. We've got to, in getting top-level buy-in is really, really important. Also, testing the waters, getting that dream team together, and the third piece is actually raising and developing the momentum that is happening at all those schools. And if you go to my final slide in here, this is my contact information. You can get in touch with me at john.yeager@culver.org. And I kind of want to finish by saying in a book by, some of you are familiar with, by Bob Quinn, who's at the University of Michigan School of Business also. He said in his book, Building the Bridges You Walk on It, when we change ourselves, we change how people see us and how they respond to us. When we change ourselves, we change the world. And that, he says, is the legacy of living in the fundamental state of leadership. And I believe that the virality of strengths can build the more that when we get other people to change how they see the world, getting it away from negativity bias, and to really seeing the power that goes beyond beyond deficiencies and really taking a gander and look at our strengths. So Ryan, thanks so much for having me on this morning. I look forward to listening to Sherri's communication and how that will collaborate with probably a lot of the different things that I said today. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely, and thank you, John. What a terrific presentation, and so wonderful to see how much this character strengths work is just spreading, all over, as far off as in Africa. And the pictures are great too. The pictures really do some nice justice. It really brings this alive. You can actually see the people actually literally working on it, and then some of the very creative things that you and Sherri and Dave have done in bringing strengths to the classroom. It's just wonderful modeling for so many people. So thanks so much. Absolutely, and now I'm very pleased. There are a couple questions coming in, by the way, but we'll wait on those to the end so that I can kind of just throw it out to either you or Sherri. So for now, I'm going to introduce Sherri Fisher. So Sherri is a leader in the field of positive education. She's an education management consultant and coach, workshop facilitator, speaker, and author, and she specializes in creative strengths and research-based learning, productivity, and change solutions for individuals in the education space. And Sherri's the first learning specialist in the world to have the MAP degree, which is the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology, and she is the co-author of Smart Strengths with John and Dave. And also she's written many articles, over 50, on Positive Psychology News Daily. And I know John has written several as well, as have I. And I would encourage you to take a look at Positive Psychology News Daily and actually register. Just Google Positive Psychology News Daily, and you can actually then do a search for articles by Sherri or John or whoever, or you can receive their mailings each day. Really wonderful way of bridging science and practice. And Sherri also owns a thriving private practice, and basically students, families, faculty, and schools team with Sherri to experience completely individualized approaches that integrate her years of education experience in independent and public settings with positive psychology research. And one other plug for Sherri that I want to say is that you can see a video of her actually on VIA's YouTube channel, where she's talking about her work with character strengths, and it's one of my favorite videos, so you might take a peek at that as well. And so without further ado, welcome Sherri.
Hi Ryan and everybody out there. Hello to my friends and to my friends I haven't met yet. It's very nice to hear from you. I think you are on a different slide than is the slide that's the first one. So Ryan.
Oh.
We need to go to the beginning.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Let me... Oh, it's way at the bottom there. Okay, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Okay. That look good? Okay, sorry about that.
Yes. Well, this way I'll be on the same slide as everybody else will be.
That's a good thing.
Yes. Okay. So you can move on to the next slide. Okay. So you saw the SMART model when John just gave his very excellent presentation, and I have a few little changes that I've made in the spotting and managing, because we're going to be talking about working with individuals, with families, and with teachers in a classroom setting during this presentation. This is going to be much more about drilling down into taking strengths and seeing what do they look like, how do you spot them, what do you do when you spot them. So for spotting, it's not just enough to be able to spot your own strengths. Other people are going to be spotting your strengths too. And when you're not using a strength that you value, you're on the shadow side of your own strengths. But other times you'll be doing something that you think is the right thing to do, and other people won't get what you're doing. And there's a spotting that happens that doesn't necessarily feel good. And we need to learn how to manage in that space too, because you have a whole family of traits, the ones that are your traits and also the ones that are more state-like that John mentioned before. And it's very important to make sure that you learn how to manage the underuse and the overuse of your strengths and find where it is in the middle that you need to be. So we want to make sure that the foundation is built when we have the SMART model, and spotting and managing are the two foundational pieces. They really must be in place before you move on to the rest. So those are the ones we're going to talk about today. They're all good, but these first two are most important. Next slide. So just before we get started, I'd like to talk about some caveats for using the VIA. I use the VIA in some way with every person who I work with, whether I do it directly or do it indirectly. It is a wonderful tool for all sorts of things. It's great for aggregating information about groups of people when you want to know about their strengths. Listed on the slide is the link for Building a Foundation for Positive Psychology in Schools, which is the research that Dave, Sharon, and I did when we were at Penn. We found that not surprisingly, but reassuringly, that a unique school district has a unique set of strengths, and that these strengths are not the same as you would find in other places in the country, for example. And we compared this unique school district, which was a large suburban school district, to a general population in the United States, and found that there were significant differences. So it's a great tool when you use the VIA for that. It also is great for exploring the lives of individuals, actual individuals, fictional individuals, living, dead. I love using it for teaching kids to improve their depth of their reading comprehension and for writing about the humanities. The language is already there. It's fantastic. But you need to remember that the strengths are dimensional, and they're also situational. So you have to be really careful and very sensitive if you're giving feedback to somebody about their strengths. You can't say, you have such and such, or you are this, especially if you're with struggling students or in troubled family settings, because you can unwittingly sort of set up conflicts and struggles, because people will see that somebody has a strength and then they will decide that strength is the reason for their problems, and then you don't end up using it in a positive way. And it's unintentional, but it's easy for that to happen. And the other thing is that despite the ordering of strengths, even though they get a number, everybody potentially has all of the strengths to some extent, and for that reason it's important to remember that we have all of them and they might not look like the same thing, and that doesn't mean that they aren't the same thing in terms of the way we've labeled them. Can you move on? Thank you. So in John's presentation, he showed a list of the VIA strengths and virtues. My clients have helped me to think of the VIA in some new ways too. So self-regulation is often something that the students and families struggle with. So two of the virtue categories here are labeled the don't do it and the just do it strengths. So if you're a procrastinator, you've likely felt the tension between those two kinds of strengths. Personalizing in this way and with humor, which makes it often easier to work with kids and strengths, is one of the many ways that we can make the VIA more accessible. So also note that each of the strengths has a star in the front. Since any strength, even the ones that are not as easy for a person, can be developed. I have had students, for example, who have sculpted their self-regulation and their perseverance by hitching those strengths to what I call a star strength, and there will be more about that later on. Unlike John, who has actually done something which I think is wonderful and it had never occurred to me, even though I've color-coded things here, I didn't really color-code them, I just colored them. So I love the idea that you could start to use the color to help kids see, as well as having them name the virtue categories. So for justice and humanity and wisdom, for wisdom, the kids will just call them the think about them strengths, so that it says think about it. For humanity, those are the ones they really need to feel. And for justice, they need to be the sharing strengths. And for transcendent strengths, they just need to be able to embrace those things, embrace my humor, embrace my gratitude, embrace hope. Next slide. So why do we want to use strengths? This is also preaching to the choir, but just three important research-based findings are that using our strengths in new ways makes people lastingly happier. So we want to make sure that when we're working with kids and their strengths, that we are letting them help make some of the choices about what they would like to do as they get more comfortable with their strengths, because these are good and positive things, and they will be happy because they're using what it is about themselves that's naturally good. The next is that strengths are a toolkit of qualities. You can harness them. You can use them for growth and achievement. You can use them to overcome challenges because they're malleable and coachable. So a teacher may report that a student, for example, lacks effort, but might actually mean that the student is not using their strengths to meet their challenges, and this is something that can be addressed through coaching. Students who know how to use their character strengths are also more resilient and more motivated and, importantly, more engaged. And there are numerous other benefits of strengths, as you know. Next. So SMART is not what you are. SMART is what you do. The VIA is the values in action classification. That A is really important. So today we're going to talk about 3 ways to use your strengths. And like many things, the order of the steps matters. You spot and develop and leverage your strengths, and in that order. So you'll see these little icons that are on this slide throughout the rest of my talk. And maybe it's because I'm a learning specialist, or maybe it's because I have creativity and beauty is too easier for me strengths, or maybe something else, but I like to illustrate what the words mean as a way to make them more memorable. So you'll find that adults as well as students are more engaged when you engage their strengths. I like to engage my own, and I hope that you will too. So the first thing that you do is you learn to spot your own strengths and those of your student. You learn to use those strengths in new and fun and initially especially low-stakes ways. For instance, you don't start out by saying we're going to build your perseverance and self-regulation by making sure that you study so that you can pass this final exam. Instead, you choose something fun, or that you, especially it works best when the student can choose something that's low stakes and fun. Then you can up your game a little bit at a time and start to leverage your strengths for specific settings or specific goals. Next slide. So for spotting your strengths, maybe you keep a journal. If so, you can start mining it for your own strengths, because this is really a great way to spot them. There are 3 features of a strength that can make it easier to spot it. The first is that it's an automatic response. The first time I went to Culver Academies, it was a lovely, warm June day. The campus, as John mentioned, is beautifully set on an expansive lake. In my spare time, and during nearly every break, I set out with my camera to photograph what seemed like a beautiful and endless array of photo opportunities. So this was my preferred way to enjoy the beauty that was there. So it was my automatic response. Without even thinking about it, I was out there with my camera, but it was also my preferred way. So as soon as I had an opportunity, I was right out there. I also wanted to share it with other people. So not only did I set out with my camera, but I even prepared a slideshow for the workshop participants so they could enjoy the beauty as well. So interestingly though, John, who lives in Culver and every single day at work walks past the lake, has seen it more as a backdrop, whereas for me it was the main event. And that was an interesting thing to share for us to say, wow, this is my strength, this is my strength. But now, John, I think, because I shared and because he shared, now we can both look at the lake differently. And the value that it has depends on what it is that we care about. So sometimes other people who don't have your strengths may seem weak to you or may seem like they don't get it. But if you have strengths language to share with that person, you find that they just appreciate something differently than you do. Next slide. So an important part of using strengths with another person is strengths listening. Strengths spotting is not just about looking. You also need to listen in a mindful way for the words that a person uses. Since the VIA strengths are all ones that any of us would probably agree are part of the good of a person, you will find that you get clues by listening to strengths language in conversations or reading emails from people or even text messages. So if you want to reinforce strengths, it's also good to build those terms into your everyday conversation. You can mirror what's good about the other person while sharing what you value, and you can listen to these examples on the slide. If you read them out loud, you'll be able to hear it even better than if you just look at them. So I'm going to say them out loud, but you can review. You persevered on your project even though it was challenging. So no matter what it was that the person faced in the project, the fact that you can point out the strengths language, you've connected perseverance to the challenge. I like the way we're sharing our creative ideas while you're deciding what to do here. I'm grateful that you told me the truth about what happened at school. Next slide. So some strengths are more useful, particularly at school, than others. This list shows ones that are correlated with school achievement. So there's zest, grit, self-control, social intelligence, gratitude, optimism, and curiosity. In a bit, we'll look at some strengths that do not necessarily make it as easy to do well at schoolwork. Notice that creativity and innovation, which we hear lots about in the era of the knowledge economy, it's missing from this list. Self-regulation, which is also called self-control, is sometimes called the master virtue, and that one's highlighted here for that reason. In combination with any of the others, this will help students to regulate their energy, their interests, their attention, their optimism, and these are the things that fuel happiness as well as learning. So what if your student finds that these are the harder strengths? So I talk to kids about strengths that are easier for them and strengths that are harder for them. This is where the strengths management is key. Next slide. So in order to manage strengths, you really have to be able to go with what works. So the first part of this is to use the strengths patterns that are already in place and build on them to get results. Even when things are not going as well as desired, something is usually working. It might just be that the student gets out of bed. The most important question to ask when achievement is disappointing, though, is what is working? So there will probably be some aspect of achievement, even in somebody who's doing poorly. And you may have to look very hard to find that one thing, but it's going to be important. So you may have to look way outside of the box. You might want to be able to keep track of collecting examples. In the previous slide where we were talking about mining for strength spotting by using a journal, one of the ways to be able to collect examples is to make sure that you keep the patterns of progress, even if they're tiny things. So in a few minutes, I'm going to show you one way to use an existing framework that will reinforce the value of spotting and managing strengths patterns. Next slide. So often it doesn't help to negotiate with a student to get them what you want. You have to be able to get them more of what they want, and sometimes that means they have to have a little bit of skin in the game. So you may find that this is where the initial challenge is. But natural consequences are the best here. You don't want to bribe someone to use their strengths or pay them off for using their strengths, and you really don't want to jump in and save them. So if your student routinely forgets lunch, and what you really want to do is not have to bring lunch to them, but you always bring it, or you tell the office to lend your student money, there's a consequence, but it's, potentially it's a good consequence for the student and a bad consequence for you. Also, if your student is modest and doesn't like having attention drawn to her plate, she might find that having you show up is very embarrassing. On the other hand, if you have a student who has gratitude as a top strength, they might be, besides not being hungry anymore, they might just be really glad to have you for a parent. So you do have to look at what your student's strengths are when you decide what kinds of natural consequences there are going to be best. And you want to make sure that you don't set yourself up for being trapped while you're trying to use your student's strengths, that your strengths are things that you keep in mind as well. On the next slide is the existing framework that I mentioned. It's the student's planner. So I like to give students a teacher planner, the old-fashioned paper variety. It's formatted just like this example. As much as we like to think that technology tools like text messaging and online assignment lists are great for kids, in my experience, those are the parts of the education puzzle that students and also their parents struggle to turn into the fabric of learning. The separate pieces of learning remain random and unconnected, especially for the zesty creative students with low perseverance and self-regulation. So we're going to take a little tour of this calendar. We're going to start by noticing that in the section that says math, that there's a test on Friday. Now typically, if a student does make note that there's a test, and it's many, many, many days into the future, so this case, Monday, it says test Friday. That was when the person found out that there was going to be a test. Then, if they actually put down test on Friday, and they failed to put down what they were going to do to prepare for that test, then it might end up being very difficult for them to do well, because many things will interfere between Monday and Friday with their preparation for that test. So the first important thing and this is on the right-hand side, says work backwards. What is the goal and what strengths are needed to accomplish this goal? So there are both the academic things, the to-dos, so do practice problems on Monday, and Tuesday go to extra help in case you have problems with those, and then make yourself a practice test, and then on Thursday take the practice test, and on Friday take the actual test. But then what you want to do after assigning those strengths, time and kind academically, is also think about what will be necessary in order to be able to pull that off. When you get your, you take your test, and then you get your test returned to you, you want to record the performance and what strengths got you there. So down at the bottom are for the what went wells. And what went well refers to, in the Smart Strengths book, this is also called 3 times good, the 3 questions that you want students to answer. What happened, what was good about it, and why did it happen? If you're specifically working to coach somebody to improve their study skills, if you keep track of the things that they are doing well so that they can be replicated, you're obviously much more likely to get better results. Because a lot of times kids who are not doing well aren't doing well because they don't understand the content. They're not doing well because they're not doing what needs to be done with the content. So they want to make notes. Before long, you'll have not just a planner of what to do, but you'll also have a journal of what's been done. And that helps you to be able to move forward. Next slide. Finally, you want to avoid negative thinking traps, such as he ought to be able to do this, she's not trying, or he's avoiding the work on purpose, or not enough effort is being applied. There are any number of negative thinking traps like this. These are your strengths buttons being pushed. Even when students are struggling, something is working. Can you identify this and connect it to a strength? Strengths use is situational. John mentioned the tonic and phasic strengths. They're also dimensional. They are more or less of something. So not everybody's strengths are equally valuable in the same setting. And even in different classes in the same school, you could see a student would have similar strengths to somebody else on paper, but in practice it could look very different. So I tell students that the most important thing that they can do in most classes is to make the teacher think they care. What if I don't care? They often ask me. In that case, a strong honesty strength might work against the student. So we have to figure out what could work. So what if they have creativity and curiosity and teamwork and love and humor as strengths that they say, yeah, I could use that. We need to help the student to choose what fits them and let them choose the little ways that they can use their powers for good and for learning. Because if the teacher thinks the student does not care, no matter what the student does, they're already working much, much harder than they need to. Remember those natural consequences? Well, be careful not to swoop in and save a student if things don't immediately turn rosy. One of the most important things is to give the strengths approach time to work and be willing to let the student, not you, tweak it by asking good questions. What would it be like if is one of the best questions that there is, because kids will usually tell you what they think would work. And then you can help them choose something that fits them better. So you want to make sure that you beware of the strengths button and you check in with yourself. If you are feeling frustrated or angry with that student, then you need to make sure that you are also looking at the strengths that you have that will work. So if the student is not being creative and you have creativity as a strength, you need to say to yourself, I think I might be having a strengths moment. Next slide. So how will you know that you have a strengths button? You'll know because other people are violating it. So if you're having an immediate reaction, we all have them. Not fair, that's just not fair. Or someone tells you something and you think to yourself, liar. These strengths reveal what we value, especially when we're on autopilot, which is probably most of the time unless we're really working to take stock of what we're thinking. So take responsibility for your contribution to what aggravates you, and then you can make the strengths button stop zapping you. So maybe you feel saddled with all of the responsibility at home if you're a parent. Maybe you are having a fairness moment. Maybe you react really viscerally when your child lies to you. You can take a deep breath and count to 10, but you can also say, I think I'm having an honesty moment. So in the next slide, we'll appreciate the value of the environment when good strengths turn to the dark side. So this is a real student, and this real student had lots of DSM diagnoses and had been in special ed for years, had a big, fat discipline file, had spent lots of time in psychological services both in and out of the school, and required support from just about every department you could imagine in a school. However, he was part of a classroom strengths pilot in a large suburban high school, and his teacher had him take the VIA. By then he was 17 years old. So it's no surprise if you look on this slide that the harder strengths are the ones that would make school easier for him. So if he had them and knew how to harness them. So his harder strengths were self-regulation, caution, leadership, teamwork, and perspective. And those things are really important, especially self-regulation, when you are at school. But that was something that he really lacked. So not only did he get in trouble at school, it was by escalating already existing things. So he could be sitting in a classroom and something else that another person did, he could make even crazier. He had been sent to the principal's office for behaviors such as repeatedly calling a teacher by her first name, even when he'd been asked to stop. Over and over, he would call down there, "Hey, Wanda," and he'd wave to her and smile. He was mostly being friendly, but he thought it was very funny. He hid a male classmate's homework in the girls' bathroom. There's his creativity at work and those easier strengths. And he invented a new nickname for another student every day for several weeks. And the other student did not like it, but many other students in the class did, and this fed a whole wave of humor. And of course, with all that zest that he had, it was very hard for him to just take a step back and not keep on going. So he wasn't the first with a behavior, but he could make something extreme. He, on the other hand, was generally really well liked by his students and teachers. It was hard not to like him, even when he was impossible. It was the rare teacher who couldn't say, "But I like him." He also missed a lot of details in class. He missed directions and homework assignments and exactly what to do. He was writing. He didn't include enough information. But he had a really important strength that once he recognized it was the beginning of a turnaround for him. And that was that he had love as a strength. So, at school people found it hard to stay angry with him. And he had this certain charm, but also a certain vulnerability. And he didn't ever blame the school personnel for doing their job. So if he got punished, he got punished. He took it. So what do you suppose happened to him? Well, it's about the environment where your strengths are such a good fit that the harder strengths don't end up being such a problem for you. This particular student decided that he would enter the military. And the strengths that he has, the easier strengths and the harder strengths, were a much better fit, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So he learned to hitch his strengths to a star strength. And that's what you do when you leverage the strengths that you have. You've learned how to spot and manage, and this is taking managing your strengths to another level. So this guy chose a new environment to support the strengths that were difficult for him. In other words, the Army made it possible for his harder strengths to not be so hard for him. They just take care of his self-regulation. You do what they say. There's a tight schedule. Leadership is expected. That's what they're grooming you for. Teamwork is part of the whole plan. Everybody is on the same team. Those things weren't nearly as much of a difficulty for him. So though he's lightened things up in Afghanistan, he chose to go to Afghanistan. There's his bravery strength. And his humor and his zest, those are things that lighten it up for everybody else in Afghanistan as well. He also has developed his leadership and teamwork strengths as part of something bigger than himself. And he is a decorated soldier now. He's outperformed all the others in his unit. He's received numerous meritorious promotions, and he came back to visit the school that graduated him, and he still called the teacher by her first name. but this time she did not flinch. She was really impressed. The next slide. So you need to be using your powers for good, spotting your strengths, managing your strengths, and hitching your strengths to a star, because it's the strengths that aren't the academic ones that are most important for your academic and career progress. Because if you don't use your powers for good, all the smarts in the world will only get you maybe good grades, but what else? Because it's the overuse and underuse of your strengths that are hindering your success. You could be even more successful, and you'd be happier. And ultimately, happiness is what leads to success. So you want to hit your strengths to a star to increase both well-being and school achievement. And the last slide is my contact information. I want to thank you all for being here today. And the slides are going to be posted for you to review, and I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to meet with you.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Sherri, and great presentation, and I really particularly liked some of the examples that you gave as well. That really brought a lot of the different concepts to light too. Well, there are a couple different questions. I know we're kind of running short on time, so let me just pose a couple of them to you all. One question is, and this is for John or Sherri, is there any work being done in homeschooling, like homeschooling programs or homeschooling organizations that you are aware of?
Not that I know of, but I think that would be a great place to take strengths work. I have individual students and families who I work with, but not who have said, oh, I'd love to take this to my organization. So that's a great idea.
Yeah, and that sounds like that would be a great opportunity to connect with not only the organizations but the parents themselves. And is there, along those lines, is there any kind of key tip that I know both of you noted many tips that would answer this question, but any standout tip in terms of for parents in particular?
Well, I'd like to say that lots of times the reason that parents don't decide to take this back to an organization, especially if they're homeschooling, is that they think of their own student as being unique in all the world. So they aren't people who are necessarily looking to a much broader audience. They're worried about what they're going to do tomorrow. And so for people who are sort of the 50,000-foot view people who are out there in homeschooling, those are the people who would be, they would have the best shot at trying to either develop something or take it to the next level in a network of people. Another thing that would be interesting would be all the homeschool networks have conferences. Oftentimes they're in the summer. And that would be a great place to start broaching this idea and to build a homeschool-friendly approach to doing this.
Great. Okay. Another question relates to the shadow side of strengths, and the question is what is the best way to handle when the shadow strengths become alive? Is it to help to manage the strength, or is that's being accentuated, or is it better to kind of bring in other strengths to help to balance that out?
I think both, Ryan. I think one is to have an awareness of one's strength that it can go to the shadow side, but when it's not, and this goes back to some of the things that Sherri was talking about, because sometimes that strength really works for that person. Okay, I had a student many years ago who humor and playfulness and leadership were his top strengths, but he did something, he did a couple things that just really took him over the edge. And beginning to have the dialogue with young people to understand this is what gets you what you need and you want, and at the same time it can be your worst nightmare. And so being able to understand that and to be able to have pause when that shadow side might be ready to happen, whether that student is in an environment that might promote the shadow side to go on. But also, I think it's true is that what you said about looking at other strengths and how can other strengths help to support not going to the shadow side with that strength too.
Great. Another question relates. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add there's a great story about this in the Smart Strengths book. And one of the other things you can do is you can, instead of diving in and saving the student or trying to sort of talk them through what they did, it's important for the student to be able to say what they did and to have whatever the natural consequence is follow that. Because eventually you want the student to be able to say, I'd really like to work on my blank strength. So if it's self-regulation, I really would like to work on my self-regulation strength. Then you have opened the conversation for that second part you were saying, where it's the using other strengths will help you to work on that strength that you want to work on.
Gives them a great opportunity for growth. Yeah, excellent point. Another question came in about other assessments that you use, particularly in doing any kind of 360 evaluation for the students.
I'll jump in here. Because I'm a learning specialist, I have more types of tests than you could possibly imagine. When I get a new client family, the student, by the time they get to me, has had a neuropsych evaluation, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and lots of other tests that schools give. Eventually you can learn how to mine information that is in tests like that for strengths information as well. In terms of a 360, I'll let John talk about how he has done that at Culver.
Yeah, and I think with the 360, we don't have a paper and pencil or computerized version for the 360 or the typical 360 that's used in business today, but there's several different activities, and we talk about this in the book, of getting opportunities for other people to see what a specific student's strength is. But it just can't be left as that. I think it's just one thing, because these are perceptions of other people in a snapshot of time. And so that's really one important piece to come in there, because they don't, they're just seeing where they know this other student from. But we've found when we put people in environments, when we put our students in environments where they can tell strength stories in this 360 piece, we find the classroom's a lot more healthier and interactive, especially when we're talking about students between 7th through 10th grades, where there's a tendency to go back into self and make sure that your ego's staying in good shape. We don't want it depleted there.
Okay, excellent. And maybe one final question, and this comes from me actually. It's one I'd like to ask of the speakers in this education track, and that is, what is one piece of advice you would give to, in terms of a next step for maybe some of those listeners who are teachers or they're administrators in a school, and they are maybe mildly familiar with strength, certainly a lot more familiar with strength now that they've listened to both of you speak, but they haven't maybe done a whole lot of it explicitly in their work, and what's like one next step? I mean, you all both offered many different things they could start to play around with, and certainly reading your book would be another good step, but what's one small step maybe they can even start today that you would recommend to that person?
Well, I had mentioned this idea of getting a dream team together, getting teachers that really want to internalize this, and getting just several teachers together. And in some ways, this can start bottom up too, okay, or mid up. But to begin to and test some things out and see the difference, and be saying, is this changing what's going on in my classroom? Is this changing the atmosphere in this? Is actually, am I seeing that it's changing how they're addressing their work there with academic success and achievement and things like that? And then seeing this happen with another teacher who's buying into this too, and just getting that to kind of getting a groundswell with that. Of course, it's best to have the top-down buy-in, but sometimes administrators are so busy and they're looking at standards-based things, and it's really hard to, from the forest for the trees. But I think for me, that's one great area, trying it out and seeing it, believing it, so it allows for that teacher to have a lexicon of communication to be able to share this with fellow teachers.
Great, thanks, John. Any Sherri, any final thought from you on that point?
Well, I think that the important thing is to be able to have the shift in your mindset that even when something bad is happening, there might be something good in it, and that is if nothing else, that would be the first thing to do, because none of the rest of it will really work if you are looking for how strengths are somehow the root of the problem, which a lot of times is what happens if I go and talk with teachers in the school setting and they have some familiarity with strengths. They want to know what can we do to get the things that aren't there? How can we fix what's wrong? So it is instead looking at what's already working and building on that and building a foundation with that, because the other things will naturally follow from that and build on that foundation.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add one thing in there too?
Sure.
Sherri and I, there's this one teacher that came into this back in 2006, Eddie, and he he knew for years and years he had to be, as a coach and a teacher, he had to be just my way of the highway, command control and stuff like that, and he thought that was the way to go. And I think that when Dave, Sherri, and I helped to nudge him to begin to see, is this who you really are? And he eventually has shifted that. He's a member of the site team at Culver, and a big proponent of this now, because he actually was honest and told the truth on himself, that he really was not working with his strengths, and that he says now that, and we've quoted him before saying, I now think about how I teach differently. And that's at least for me, is crystallizing and knowing that, and this is going on, piggybacking on what Sherri just said, that there's another way of looking at this. And when we get teachers to do that, it's amazing how students will respond to that.
And I find that students respond really well to learning about their strengths, sometimes better than the adults who work with them do, at least initially, because kids are relieved that something that's good about them is valued by not just themselves. So kids who have humor as a top strength, they're relieved that it's okay that they're funny, because they spend a lot of their energy for self-regulation, which is very hard for them, trying to not say something in class and just be disruptive. So it's the being able to see that as a strength. It just might not be a strength in a certain environment. That is such a fantastic life skill for kids to know that something about you is fantastic, but it's just not fantastic here.
Yes. It's such a win-win for the teacher, but then also for the student, and for something that's just very natural to tap into. And as both of you said, it supplements and complements what teachers are already doing, and it's not necessarily a big add-on thing that they have to do. So, well, great. On behalf of the whole VIA community, I just want to say extend great gratitude to both John Yeager and Sherri Fisher for taking the time to offer wonderful wisdom and tips for the whole VIA community about bringing character strengths to work with schools and students. So thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.